May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we've been following the story of Moses and the Israelites over these past weeks. And last week we heard how Moses and God led the Israelites through the Red Sea towards the Promised Land, narrowly escaping the Egyptian army with 600 plus chariots. And at this point, in the story that we hear this morning, the Israelites are beginning their second month of walking in the wilderness following that harrowing flight from Egypt. And it is understandable that they might be a bit grumpy. God has brought them to this place where they are hungry and they need to speak up. And God hears their struggle and answers them. And throughout the book of Exodus, God's purpose in liberating the Israelites is not simply to bring them to a destination, a promised land, but to establish a new, exclusive relationship with them and to dwell among them. And so God tells Moses that God will rain bread from heaven for the Israelites. And each day they must go out and gather just enough for that day. And we know this story. We know that this bread from heaven is totally unrecognizable to the Israelites, and they ask, "What is it?" The literal translation of manna, what is it? And some consider this manna to be a sort of a desert lichen, while others connect it with desert shrubs of the genus Tamarix, and considered to be a secretion of the plant or its sap flowing from the wounds caused by insects. But either way, this manna comes in small little bits, and it is flaky. And the quail that the Israelites find in the evening are also small. The Israelites can only gather enough for each day. If they try to gather too much and try to store it up for another day, it becomes foul and breeds worms. And so each day they are fed and sustained by God, needing to trust that each morning as they come out of their tents, God will have rained bread from heaven for them, and needing to trust each other that each one gathers only enough as they need. And we all find ourselves in wilderness at one time or another. Wilderness of the unknown, of uncertainty, of insecurity. We all have known times of wilderness in which we don't have many options but to trust God. Trust that God will give us each day what we need, not necessarily what we want. And it might not be as much as we want. It might be just enough. And sometimes these small, flaky bits of bread from heaven might be totally unrecognizable to us. And it is not until much later that we realize how that sustained us. I think especially of this time back in 2020, when I know I was still trying to wrap my head around the idea that we, along with the rest of the world, might not be going back to normal by Christmas that year. Or, as we would come to find out, the next year. We are constantly reminded that we really do need to take things one day at a time. I can't help but thinking what would have happened if the Israelites were told here, a month or two into their journey, oh, by the way, you are going to be wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years, also known as a really long time. Yep, by the way, you're going to be wandering in the wilderness for 40 years before you enter the promised land. I find it helpful to think one day at a time. And it is interesting that this story is paired in the lectionary with the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Those who had been laboring all day grumbled that those who had started late in the day did not deserve to be paid the same amount of money as those who had been working all day. Those late arrivals had not earned it, to which the landowner responds, this wasn't about having earned anything. It was about generosity, his generosity. And I believe we have a part in this generosity, in helping God generously rain bread from heaven for everyone. Those little things which have surprised and sustained us each day. An act of kindness that we have received, which perhaps was barely noticeable to anyone else. A prayer offered for us. A good morning with a wave extended to us as we are out walking. And not to mention actual food and water and sustenance to those who find themselves in need. We have a part in sharing those gifts of bread from heaven that we have received, that sustain us, and that we can freely offer to others. Those surprises and reminders that God is faithful are there for each and every one of us, each and every day. And sometimes there might be some grumbling on our part, and that grumbling might be well warranted. But then we need to step out of our tents and allow ourselves to see and to accept those surprises and reminders, and to gather them and to let them fill us and to share them. As Christ has taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread, in whatever form that bread may take. Give us this day our daily bread, that we may live as faithful people with our God and with each other. Amen.